Okay, let's look at the sub-assemblies and how I undercoated them. This bit, the main body of the vehicle, I did lead belcher because naturally it's going to be mostly metallics. The next separate part I did was the roof. This will be mostly metallics as well, so once again lead belcher. The next piece after this was a rivet cannon, surprise surprise, mostly lead belcher. This was followed by all the York crew. Now these have done black because I undercoat all my Yorks black, so it helps to keep that consistency across the whole army. The next bit is the front of the vehicle. Now I actually undercoated this in both black and silver, and I'll just show you how I did that now. Initially I undercoated the front section of the vehicle lead belcher because it's metallic, but I want the tyres to be black, so what I'll do, I'll get some blue painter's tape, I'll put that around the bulk of it, the centre section that's going to be lead belcher, and then I'll spray that with Abaddon black. This will save me having to paint over the tyres later on. As you can see, the tape did its job and kept the black and lead belcher separate. And with that, everything's in sub-assemblies and undercoated, so let's get on to painting the first piece, the York gunner. The first thing I'll do on the gunner is his flesh. Now I always do this flesh of the Yorks first because it can be quite a messy step, lots of just quick brushing and dry brushing. So first things first, a base coat of Warg flesh. Now you'll see throughout the video I'll fast forward through the slower parts just so you don't spend 10 minutes watching me do one coat of paint. Now, like Duncan says, you should always do 2 thin coats, and that's something I stick to here. So, I'm now doing the second coat of Warg flesh. Once again, it's a thin coat because I don't want to block out any of that detail. The third step for the skin is to do a quick dry brush of Warboss green. This is a fairly heavy dry brush because I want to get most of it, most of the skin and most of the recesses. Not deep into the recesses, but most of them. Following that, we'll get some Biotan green shade. Now I'll do a fairly heavy coat of this because I really want to highlight all those recesses and any kind of depth in the York. It really stands out on the fingers and in the inner muscle. After that, I'll do another coat of Warboss green. This is just a light dry brush, just to get the raised edges, and I'll do this instead of a layering or edge highlighting. Now I must apologise for the video here, the camera lost focus, but what I'm doing now is the lead belcher. I'm doing lead belcher on the eyepiece, the chest bionics, the backpack, the grenade the gun is holding, and as well as the pumps on his underarm and shoulder. So there, focus returned. And as you can see, base coat of lead belcher on all the metallic parts. Next I will do Ural yellow. Now for the wire here, you could use any colour, but I think the yellow kind of looks more mechanical, electrical, whatever you want to call it. The other wire I'll do is Abaddon black. Just nice contrasting colour, add some black in there. It's a nice high pigment paint, so it's easy to get on. I'll follow that up with another coat of Ural yellow just to get that second coat on the wires because yellow is kind of a thin colour. Now this next bit is my secret for orcs. I like to have their metal look all rusted like it's come out of a junkyard. Don't want it looking neat and shiny, so I do a thick coat of Typhus corrosion, and we'll see how this turns out later on. For a contrasting metal, I'll do Runelord brass. It looks like a fairly thin colour, and it won't see much difference, but we'll get that later. This would be a Evil Sun's orc, so I want to get some red on there. So I'll start with corn red, just on the bits of cloth tying to the wires, and we'll do a bit more red later. Now if we go back to the metal, I'll do a heavy dry brush of lead belcher. Now this can be as soft or as heavy as you like, depending on what you want the metal to look like. At this stage we've done the bulk of the York, so we get to move up to the fun stuff, the more detailed work that really makes the York pop. So we're going to start with the teeth and the nails, and for this I use your sharp debone. After this we'll move on to a bit of red, so Mephiston red on that little shoulder bit. Now most of this of the right side will be covered up when the gun goes on, so don't worry about being too neat. And just to get a bit more red, I'll get the little raised box on the backpack. When doing this box, I noticed I missed the wire up the top, so I've got black again, just like I said, good easy colour for good coverage. I've just gone over that wire. Next I'll do non-oil, and I'll do this over all the Orc Bionics. I'll do it on the chest plate, the headpiece, and then the pumps on the back and underarm. This will just make it look nice and oily, as I imagine Orc Bionics to be. After that, Agric Earthshade over everything else that's not skin. So over the wires, the backpack, the grenade, the teeth, the nails, and that will just give the Orc the nice dirty look that Orcs should have. Next I'm going to start working on the machinery that the Orc's sitting upon. So I'll start this with a wire, once again I'll use Ural yellow, then I'll do Runelord brass on the cog type things. With those drying, I'll do the rivets holding the little red box on, and I'll just do these lead belchers, 4 quick points. Next, onto the eyes, and I use Evil Sun Scarlet for this. Now the eyes can be tricky, but if you're a bit messy, like I am, we'll fix it up later, don't worry. And then of course, second coat of the bloody yellow on the bottom wire. Now another coat of Agate Earthshade over the Runelord Brass, just to try to darken that colour to make it really stand out from the lead belcher. Now if you're new to painting, a good trick is to just use multiple coats of the same shade just to really change the colour of something. So in this case, the Runelord Brass looks fairly indistinguishable from the metal. It's a very soft colour, but after 2 or 3 coats of Agate Earthshade, it really makes a nice unique colour that I really like. I used the Sharp Debone just to pick out the teeth and highlight them a bit more. Just did another coat of the Uriel Yellow. Now here you can see I'm touching up the eye where I went out with just Warboss Green, quick and easy, and get it done. Then Corn Red just to pick out yet another wire on that base plate, and just the 2 on the backpack. And with that, the Orc's pretty much done. The fact it's an Orc means there's heaps of little details you can add if you want to, face tattoos, etc, but I'm pretty happy with it. And with the Orc looking this good close up, imagine what it'll look like when it's just the size of your thumb. Next we'll move on to the rivet cannon itself. Okay, we're going to get cracking on the rivet cannon here. So first thing, like with all my metal, is Typhus Corrosion. Typhus Corrosion everywhere. Well, not quite everywhere. There's some bits I'm going to end up doing a brassy kind of look, so I don't want Typhus Corrosion on them, but I do want it everywhere. I'm just going to do the plain metal. As you can see, giving a good coat pretty much everywhere. Then once it's dry, got Lead Belcher. Once again, just do a heavy dry brush over it all to get all that Typhus Corrosion and make it look less like something we've just slapped Typhus Corrosion on, and more like decayed kind of rusting metal. Now this is the same thing as you did on the gunner metal, so you should have the hang of it and be a bit faster this time hopefully. And look at that, a coat on everything done, looks pretty good. We go on to Mephiston Red. Now we're going to put a lot of red on this. I know there wasn't a whole lot of Mephiston Red on the gunner to kind of make it stand out as a Speed Freaks vehicle, but we're going to make up for it on the cannon. So a nice bit of red everywhere we think we should put it. We don't want to have it everywhere because that'll make the cannon look kind of one-dimensional and flat, so we want to leave a few bits to do other kind of colours or different metal looks. Next we're going to put some corn red on the cloth. Just like the gunner, we're going to try to do the cloth corn red, keep it consistent across the whole vehicle, including the rivet cannon. And then we're going to go on to another little detail. This little armoured plate here, we're going to do Wasducker Red. Just like with the gunner, we're going to have the odd plate here and there Wasducker Red to make it stand out, slightly different but still red. And here we're going to use the brass to get a nice diversity of metal in the cannon. So we're going to do it on that central part and then just to the 2 sides of where the corn red cloth is. Then we're going to put it on the, for lack of a better word, magazine or clip that the rivets are in. Just a quick look to make sure we've got everywhere I want. And then we move on to the second coat of Wasducker Red, just getting it over that base plate and make sure we get the side, especially that front facing bit. And now we do the second coat of Runelord Brass, just a nice even coat over everywhere, but I'll also do the front rods just because I thought the metal needed a bit more diversity there. And once we're happy, we'll move to the next step, which is Lead Belcher. Now the Lead Belcher, we're just going to touch up the bits where we've been a bit messy. So these front spikes, we've got the red on them, we're just going to neaten those up, the front of the gun, neaten it up, and then that little edge bit there, we're just going to clean up that red. And then we're going to move on to the dry brushing the red. Now once again, this is Lead Belcher, and we're just going to make it look like it's kind of chipped or rusted, just a quick dry brush over the edges, and then we're going to get those little spikes on the side. And we're just going to go till they look like a nice solid metal colour. And then once we're happy with this stage of Lead Belcher, we're going to move on to Agate Earthshade, the messy stage. So this is just going to go over everything pretty much. We want Agate Earthshade to coat everything into every nook and cranny, especially on those brass bits to make it a much richer colour, and just make the whole thing look like it's been weathered, dirty, been out in the rain, sun, everything for a while. Once that's done, Uriel Yellow onto this little dial here. Just do a quick coat, and while waiting for that to dry, I'm going to do just a highlight of corn red. This is completely unnecessary, makes the model look very slightly better, but it was something to do while I was waiting for yellow to dry. And then I can do another coat off the yellow just to make it a bit brighter, a bit richer. And once I'm happy with that, I go on to Lead Belcher again. Just going to get all the rivets, touch all of those up, them stand out a bit more. And once we're happy, once we've got all those rivets, we move on to Abaddon Black, and we're just going to paint the dial. Now you notice here, my brush doesn't have that fine a point, it's a bit curved, but it does the job. You don't need to be 100% clean here because the bit's raised, so it's easy to do a nice detailed job there. And once you're happy with that, we're going to move into lead pelcher and just touch up the side. And here you'll see the cannon's done and now it's stuck to the York. Now here's what the York looks like altogether, all angles. But while I was doing this, I noticed that yellow wire down the front. Didn't like it, it looked a bit too plain. So what I've did is I went and put some hazard stripes on it, just black lines across it. Did that quickly, just to make it look a bit less plain, make it look a bit more intricate. Just, I don't know, make the model look a bit more interesting overall. So after these first two stages, this is what your model should look like. A nice orc gunner with his rivet cannon ready to go. And now, the next part. Alright, starting off, Typhus Corrosion as usual over all the metal that I want to do the rusted decayed metal look. I'll leave some bits just silver because I want to do them Runelord brass. So you can see I've left the side, the left little pole, two spiky bits, and the top little circle. I actually changed my mind at this point, decided no, I want that top circle to be Typhus Corrosioned, so I put that on, and while that's drying I go back to the second coat of Runelord brass, just to get that nice and done. Next, lead belcher. You know this drill, just a heavy dry brush over all the Typhus Corrosion, make it look like that decayed metal that you know and love by now. So, quick coat over everything, doesn't take too long, do it fairly heavy, try to avoid getting the brass, and then we move on to the Mephiston red. On red, I'm just going to do over that main plate, as you can see. While doing two thinner coats is usually better, with orcs and a base coat like this you can get away being a bit messier, so I've done a single thick coat. And then, once that's done and dry, we move on to lead belcher, just neaten up where I spilt the paint, and then just do some chipping effects with a light dry brush. Then, Agrax Earthshade. Agrax, as per usual, we're going to put everywhere, just get a nice heavy coat of it over everywhere. And once that's done and dry, move on to lead belcher. Now I'm just picking out all the nails or bolts just to make them pop, and the spikes a little bit. Once that's done, just do Agrax Earthshade again onto these brass pieces like we've done everywhere else, and here we are. Finished product, nice and quick and done. And if you've been following this guide, you can now add it to the gunner and cannon, and this is what you should have so far. At this point it's becoming fairly apparent what the overall aesthetic will be. It's a kind of dirty red, not a bright red, but a nice dirty red, and a kind of reclaimed scrapyard kind of look. Let's get started on the meat of this project, the core of the buggy and the engine block. Now if you remember in part 1, we undercoated this whole subassembly lead belcher, and that's going to pay us dividends now. Now it is mostly metal, so I do the same thing I do for all my orc metal, give it a good coating of Typhus Corrosion to start off with. Not just on the outside, but also a little bit on the inside. Once that's done, once again do what I always do, give it a heavy dry brush of lead belcher. Now you don't need to get everywhere, because especially on the inside you're not going to see it. Well, you will see some of it, but not all. And on the underside you're not going to see any of it once it's on its base. So just focus on the visible parts. You can do more if you want to, and from some angles you might be able to see it, but when it's on the tabletop you won't. So it's really up to you how deep you want to go. Now this subassembly does have a lot of surface area, so it can take a while to get these first two steps done, but that's the foundation everything else is going to be built upon. Now that the metal wall looks degraded and damaged, we're going to move on to the primary colour, which for me is Mephiston red, because I'm doing Evil Suns. But if you're doing Bad Moons, you feel free to go yellow or black for Goths, whatever clan you want to do. Now you don't need to copy me exactly here, it's kind of up to you where you do the red. You can copy me, I think it looks pretty good, but tailor it as you see fit. And as you can see, just doing little bits and pieces, not everywhere, but enough so you can definitely tell it's a Evil Sun's vehicle. You'll also see I'm getting a little bit of the inside, just what your eye might be able to see when you're looking through. Once all that's done, we're going to move on to the tyres, so this is pretty easy, just Abaddon black all over the tyres, inside and outside. Once the black on the tyres has dried, we're going to do a dry brush of Eshin Grey. Now this may go on fairly bright, but as it dries, and if it doesn't have a bright light shining on it like I do, it'll be a much more subdued effect, and it'll just add that bit more contrast to the vehicle. Now for this next step, we're going to use Abaddon Black to try to make it look like all the black smoke belched from the exhaust pipes has stained them. So as you can see, I'm just flicking Abaddon Black across. Now I'm only doing it one direction, I'm only doing it from the left side to the right side here, not both ways, just from the left to the right. This is just so you get the directional effect and it's not tainted by doing it in both directions. Now I'm doing it quite light to start off with, but I'll go heavier and heavier till I get the effect I desire. It's important to get it all around the pipe, both the sides and a little bit underneath if you think that viewpoint might be accessible. Once I'm happy with the effect around the sides, I'll just do the, I guess, end points, and then I'll eventually do inside once I'm happy with it all. Now that I'm happy with the first set of exhaust pipes, I'll move on to the second, then the third, fourth, so I've done them all. Here you will see what all four of the exhaust pipes look like when they're done. So you can see that kind of stain look coming through. It's not the whole pipe, it's just where the smoke belch forth would stain it. Once we're happy with that, we go on to non-oil. Now non-oil, I'm just going to do a heavy coat all over the engine block. Naturally the AUK engine I think should be nice and greasy. And I'll do it at the cogs and things at the back of the vehicle. While the non-oil is drying, I'll move on to Warhammer brass. Now like with the other parts of the vehicle, the gunner, etc., we're going to do this in random bits of the metal to give it a bit more tone, just alternate between just the harsh lead belcher and the red. Now I'm going to go straight onto the first and then second coat when it's dried here, but just pick out any bits of the metal you think would look good or just need to differentiate the vehicle. And remember what I do with AUKs, it's mostly asymmetrical, you don't want a perfectly symmetrically built AUK vehicle. Once the first coat of non-oil was dry, I decided no, it's not oily enough for me, so I went ahead and did a second coat. You can or cannot do that depending on what you like, it's really a personal preference. While the oil was drying, I thought I'll just do this little plate here, a Wasducker red, just to break up the red with a different shade. The AUKs tried to keep it all red, but they ran out of the right shade of paint, so they got what they got. Once that's done, corn red, just all over the fabric parts, like with the rest of the AUK so far, just keep it consistent. All the kind of cloth fabric are going to be corn red. It's still red, but different kind. Then I did yet a third coat of Warhammer brass because I still wasn't happy with it. I wanted to break up the interior, but didn't want to necessarily add more colours to the palette of the vehicle, so I'm just using corn red on the barrel. It suits, it fits, and it keeps it nice and simple. With that done, I did all the little double faces black, didn't do it neatly, just threw them on, and my camera died, so hence the darkness. Pick up in a moment, and we'll keep going. Alright, battery charge, and I noticed I missed a little bit of cloth here, so just corn red, touch it up, nice and quick, done. Before I move back to Abaddon Black, and just do a second coat on these dials. Next, just Mornfang brown over the AUK boots, just a nice brown leather, I think it suits, any kind of colour you want to do will work. After that, Ultham Grey on the dials. Now I picked Ultham Grey because it was a nice contrasting colour, easy to see and picks out. Now because you're going onto black with the white, you may need to do a few coats, but that's no real issue. Now I've just got lead belch again, and I'm just going along and cleaning up, getting all the bits of metal where I've got my fist on red, I didn't want to, sharpening up edges, especially on the spiky bits. The tyres, I noticed I missed the inside rims, so I'm just going to give them a quick dry brush, and then a quick dry brush on the little back, on the back cogs to make it look like the sharper bits of the machinery are less oiled. Once I'm happy with all that, I'll move back to Abaddon Black and just neaten up the tyres, just where some of the metal's got over them, or I think there's a bit too much Ashen Grey, I'll just patch that up quickly. The final part for this sub-assembly is Agrex Earthshade. I know, big surprise. Everywhere that isn't non-oil already, or that's not a tyre, you're going to put Agrex on. And not a little bit, you're going to do a fairly heavy coat of it. This will keep it consistent with the roof of the vehicle, which we did in the previous video, and just make it look a lot more weathered and bring out the recesses of the vehicle. Don't forget the inside rims of the tyres, they're important. And once you've done that, congratulations, you've finished the biggest part of this vehicle. Once again, metal, just like everything else on the vehicle. So we'll start with typhus corrosion to get going, and once we've done a nice thick coat of that everywhere, we'll then move on to the wheels. Don't forget to get the rims of the wheels too. It's easy to forget, I've done it more than once myself. With typhus corrosion successfully done, we'll move on to the rest of the wheel. So for this, we'll just get Abaddon Black and we'll just put it everywhere, front and back. That, well, is a tyre really. Depending on how successful you were with the undercoating, this might only take you 5 seconds, or this might take a bit longer like me. And if you weren't able to undercoat with Lead Belcher and Abaddon Black, you'll just have to do the whole wheel black. It's a little bit more time consuming and annoying, but it's not really difficult, you're just painting black. Don't worry about getting too far underneath the tyre, because it's going to be stuck down to the base. You'll never be able to actually lift it up and look underneath it. And if someone did for whatever reason and saw that it wasn't properly black or not fully painted, does it really matter? With the wheels blocked off, we'll move on to doing a heavy dry brush of Lead Belcher over all the typhus corrosion. You've done this 1,000 times before now, it's the same thing. Once again, don't forget to get the rims off the wheels, easy to forget. Next we'll do a coat of your sharp bone over those horns or tusks coming out of the front of the vehicle. You can do this as multiple thin coats to get it nice and smooth, or you can do it as a heavy coat. If you go heavy, it might look a bit lumpy or bumpy, but it's an old horn stuck to the front of an orc vehicle. It will get ruined. It won't be all smooth and pristine, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Next is the clan colour. I'm doing Evil Sons, so it's going to be red. But do whatever colour matches your clan, or just do whatever colour you think looks the best. If you're planning to have more than one Kustom Boosta Blasta in your army, or if you're just painting your second +1 now, try to avoid using the same clan colours in the same spot. I don't mean use a different colour entirely, I just mean if you're doing the front of the vehicle like this, with this one, maybe do behind the teeth in the vehicle and just leave the bit under now red metal, if that makes sense. The idea is that if you've got two vehicles on the battlefield, they don't look like they've come off production line where they get painted the exact same way. You want them to look different from one another as much as possible really, but making sure that there's enough red or whatever your clan colour is to ensure you can tell what clan the orcs are fighting for. I'm now just doing my second coat of your sharp bone over those horns or tusks at the front of the vehicle. Like I said, if you did a heavy coat to start off with to make it look a bit more rugged or worn or dirty or damaged, whatever you want to call it, you probably can skip this step and you'll still get a good looking result. Flat black on the tyres looks a bit, well, plain and two-dimensional, so I'm just giving it a quick dry brush with Eshin Grey just to give it a bit more depth, make it look a bit more three-dimensional. It does look fairly starkly contrasted at this point, but don't worry, it's just the really high lighting I've got on my camera. In person, it's much more subdued, and once it dries, it'll be more so. This step is probably the most painful of this bit of sub-assembly. I'm doing Lead Belcher and I'm getting it over, just neating up everything. So there's little spikes at the front, making sure they're done, the rims around the horns or tusks, making sure they're nice and silver, the spikes on the wheels, I'll get those, and just look around the model and see if anywhere needs to be touched up at all with the Lead Belcher. And finally, a heavy coat of Agrax Earthshade all over the vehicle. When doing the tusks with the Agrax Earthshade, I try to make it look darker down the bottom and lighter up the top. Now to do this, you can just put a bunch of Agrax on it and the gravity will do the rest of the work for you. But you can also just put it down the bottom and then use a brush to pull it up. That way you're getting less and less concentrations of the paint, of the wash as it moves up the tusk. Whichever way works for you, it's an Orc vehicle and you can get away with a lot. And with the Agrax done, that's the end of this sub-assembly. Next, we're going to paint the driver. Now the driver has a very Mad Maxy kind of aesthetic, half cyborg, got that big face grill on, but I guess the face grill is pretty generic Orc. But like all the Orcs I paint, we're going to start off by doing the skin. So first up, we're going to do a coat of Warg flesh all over the skin. Don't have to be too neat here because it's the first coat and anywhere you get it that's not meant to be, you're going to paint over anyway. So just do a quick and dirty job here. Once that base coat of Warg flesh is dry, we're going to do a dry brush of Warboss grain. This is the same technique I've used on all my Orcs, and you probably remember it from the gunner we did earlier. Step 3 in my Orc skin is Biotang green shade. Just put this all over the green, quick wash, and it just adds a lot more depth to the model and makes it look a bit darker. I mean, you wouldn't want your Orcs looking like weak little weedy goblins now, would you? And the Biotang green just helps to give this darkness to distinguish the two. Once that shade's dry, another quick dry brush of Warboss green, and then the Orc skin's finished. Next we're going to do Lead Belcher, and we're going to put Lead Belcher over all the bionics. So this is in the spinal column, a lot of the plugs coming out of the driver. His hand / gear stick kind of fused together. Finally, we're also just going to do that faceplate. And the steering wheel. Once you've finished this step, it's good to give the model just a quick look over and make sure you haven't missed any parts. There are lots of little bionic bits everywhere, so it is easy to miss them, especially in bits like the knuckles or the elbow joints. Next, I'm going to pick out all the stitches and things on the model with a colour that helps identify the Orc's clan. Now I'm doing Evil Sun, so their clan colour is red, and I'm using Corn Red to pick out the stitches. You'll note I usually use Mephiston Red for the Evil Sun's colours, so I just wanted to use a slightly off red just to help distinguish it without making this look like the same colour has been used everywhere. Now the stitches are raised up from the rest of the body, so it's not too hard to pick them out, but if you make a mistake you can always go back over it with Warboss green, or just leave it. You'll need a pretty close eye to look inside the model to identify the messy stitch you've done. With the stitches done, I'm going to move on to the hardest part of the model, which is the eyes. I'm going to use Evil Sun Scarlet to pick them out, and as you can see, the first one I did alright, no real issues. The second one I make a bit of a mess on. That's not a big deal, we can fix it up later. As I've done with the vehicle body, I want to pick out some of the metallic bits in the steering wheel with Rune Lord brass, just to help distinguish it from metal, spice up the colour palette a little bit, make it a bit more interesting to look at. Next I want to do the mouthpiece, the primary clan colour. For me, with Evil Suns, that's going to be Mephiston Red. But pick whatever clan colour you're using.
You can also leave the faceplate just plain silver, it still looks fine, but just to make sure it's apparent this is an Evil Sun's Orc, I'm going to go on with the Mephiston red. And just like the metallic parts of the vehicle, I'm going to do another coat of Rune Lord Brass. It's a fairly thin colour and it's good to just do a few thin coats. While that's drying, I'm going to go fix up that eye. So just Warboss green, just paint on the raised bits outside the eyeball. If you're neat when you're doing the eyeballs, you can skip this step entirely because you won't have anything to fix up. If you weren't, well, fixing up's not that hard, as you can see. I'm now going to do all the bionics, a nice coat of non-oil. This will just make them look oily, add a bit more depth to the, recessed areas. Just make it look all over a bit better and a bit more orky in my opinion. And again, when you think you're finished, just give another quick look over to make sure you haven't missed any hidden little bionic bits. I'm now going to do a very light coat of dry brushing with lead belcher on the mouthpiece, just to add a little bit of weathering to make it look chipped. With everything finished, I go heavy coat of Agrax Earthshade over everything except the eyes and skin. Everything that's non-organic gets this heavy coat of Agrax Earthshade, same as everywhere. And when I get towards the end, I realise I've forgotten the guy's pants. So, about those pants, I just defaulted to the primary clan colour. For me, that's Mephiston red because I'm Evil Sons. I just did a coat all over. You might need to do 2 thin coats if it goes in a bit lightly, but that's alright. I'm going to give the boots a bit of Scrag brown so it matches what we did in the vehicle. And with the pants and boots dried, I'm going to do Agrax Earthshade over the 2 of them. And with that, the drive is finished. Just like with the Orcs, the grots will be started off with a base coat of Warg flesh. Just get this all over the skin. You don't need to be neat, you just need to be thorough. So if you get it on the clothes or the tools or the gun, it doesn't matter, as long as you get it over all the skin, in all the knuckles, in the recesses of the face and fingers, that sort of thing. You'll notice I've got both grots stuck to a painted pot. This is just because A, they're hard to hold, quite small and fiddly models and I've got fat fingers. B, it just makes it easier having them both there, considering you're just doing the one colour. You don't need to put one down and worry about the paint falling off while you pick up the other one. So I just find it a bit easier. I just put them onto the paint pot with blue tack, or as some call it, poster putty. It works for me. Again, just like the Orcs, the next step will just be a dry brush of Warboss green. I tend to do this slightly heavier coat than I do with the Orcs, purely just to make the grots look a little bit brighter, a bit less dark, distinguish them a bit more from the main Orc boys. But whatever you want to do is fine. Do it the same as the Orcs, do it more than the Orcs, do it less than the Orcs. I'm sure it will look great no matter what you do. So yeah, quick dry brush, just like the Orcs. You will start to see the limitations of the blue tack or poster putty when I'm doing this step. Some of the models fall off because I'm a bit too rough. It's not a big deal, but it is a little bit annoying. Up next, we've got a coat of lead belcher on the gun and on the big spanner. Again, it's easy to get a good coverage. Lead belcher is a great colour. So this should be a pretty quick step. Get it done nice and easy, quickly. It can be messy, it doesn't have to be too clean because we're going to cover it with a wash shortly, anyway. With the lead belcher done, we move on to the clan colour, which for me is Mephiston red. You'll notice I'm down to 1 grot. This is just because it kept falling off the pot when I was using 2, so I've got a lot more poster putty and just 1. So use whatever clan colour you like. As I said earlier, I'm doing Evil Sons, so I'm using Mephiston red. While the red is drying, hopefully the lead belcher is already dried because we're going to put a nice coat of Typhus Corrosion all over it. Next up is a wash of the bile tan green. You notice I did a little bit later than I did with Yorks. That's because I did the heavier dry brush of Warboss green, so I wanted to give it more time to dry. I'll also grab the other grot, don't want to miss him, and get a quick shade on him as well. While that shade is drying, we're going to get another coat of the clan colour in Kustom red and just put that over the existing layer, just to get that second coat on so it's a nice strong colour. If you're doing this in a single session, like I am, most of your model will be wet at the moment. Hopefully the typhus corrosion isn't, because now we're going to do lead belcher dry brush over that, just like with all the other typhus corrosion work. Next, one of the more fiddly pieces, the toenails and fingernails with your sharpie bone. You'll notice that I've changed from a paint pot to something with a bit of a claw. It's actually one of the Citadel painting handles, much easier than the paint pot with blue tack to hold the model securely. And I haven't had any problems with it scratching paint or gouging the model. Now that you're warmed up on fiddly parts from the nails, we're going to do the eyes with Evil Sun Scarlet. If you make a mistake, don't worry, we can go over it with Warboss green later on. Time to get out that magical skill in a bottle and use Agrac's Earthshade. Put this over everything that's not skin or eyeball, so the gun, the toenails and the red cloth. Think of this as your reward for doing the neat eyes and toenails. Now you can be messy with a nice wash over some big objects. Now to finish off that second grot, I'm doing the pants with Scrag Brown. Now I chose brown because I didn't want the grots to look like they're wearing a uniform and all wearing red. And I thought Scrag Brown still gives that nice kind of orcish rustic colour. Okay, we're going to speed through these next couple of steps because it's what you've already done before. So, typhus corrosion all over the metal. Pretty standard, what we've done for every other piece of metal. Then, once that's dry, we're going to get our good friend lead belcher and give it a quick dry brush. Once the lead belcher is dry, Agrac's Earthshade all over the metal and over the brown pants. Onto the eyes, and once again, Evil Sun Scarlet. So up to these fiddly parts. You'll notice I do a truly awful job with the eyes, get mess all over the nose, but we clean it up later. And once the eyes are done, get out your sharpie bone and do the teeth and the nails. With the final fiddly bits done, that being the teeth and the nails and the eyes, we're just going to get our Warboss green and just touch up where we messed up. For me, that's most of the nose, but there's also a bit of lead belcher on the hands and things that we get now as well. So anywhere you've messed up, here's your chance to clean up. Finally, we get Agrac's Earthshade and put it over the teeth and the nails, and then the model is done. And there you have it, a lovely grot that only a mother can love. We're so close to being done at this point, but we haven't done the chair yet. So to do that, just a quick coat of typhus corrosion all over the metal, but try to avoid that graty bit in the mid-back middle. Once the typhus corrosion has dried, do a quick dry brush of lead belcher over it all. Again, this should be pretty easy by now, you've done it on every other piece of metal. Next is a coat of Rune Lord Brass on that graty bit at the backrest that we didn't do earlier. We'll do 2 coats of this, so once you've done the first one, leave it an hour or so to dry. You can always use a hairdryer if you want to speed up the process and just smash it out. Then once that's done, do a second coat of the Rune Lord Brass. This will help make the colour nice and thick and really show through. Now we get our Agrac's Earthshade and put it over pretty much everything. The only bit you won't put Agrac's Earthshade on is that little bit of cloth at the back, on the back frame. I've currently got my clip over it, if you're not sure what I'm talking about. For that top little bit of cloth, I just do the clan colour. I'm doing Evil Sun, so I'm doing red. I chose to do the off colour, so corn red rather than Mephiston red. But whatever you do, I'm sure will look great for your army. And once that's done and dry, we'll just do a coat of Agrich Earthshade over it. And once that's on, the chair's done. Now with it all put together, this should be your current result. As you can see, it looks pretty good. However, there are a few little spaces that are a bit bland that I'll get to soon. There's a few lines in there because the glue didn't quite set. They weren't pushing it as much as I would have liked when they were set, but you can get away with these things when you're an orc. It looks a bit ramshackle, but that's just part of the aesthetic. The first bit where it was a bit bland is this back section here. So to fix that, I'm going to put some checkers on it. Checkers, naturally very orky, more associated with the goths, but I think they work with any orcs. And I'm going to use that where the two parts meet as to be my center line. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have freehanded this and should have used some of that painter's tape to get nice smoother edges, but it's only a little thing and I still think it looks pretty good. The next bit I thought was a bit bland was when looking at it front on. So to give it a bit more interest, I'm just going to paint some spikes or arrows, whatever you want to call them, on that front little engine section. Now, just doing this with Abaddon black and just keeping it very basic, just one big little triangle and two smaller ones on each side. And when that's done, the buggy is complete. If you've been following along for these 40 plus minutes, your model will hopefully look just like mine, if not better, with potentially different clan colours. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please like, subscribe and comment. With comments especially, any criticism or advice to make this future videos better would be much appreciated. And if you want to comment with what you'd like me to paint next, I have Tyranids, Orcs, Death Corps of Krieg / Imperial Guard and Salamander Space Marines.